All right, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today on this Saturday evening with Potomac Oak Tutoring. I've been lucky enough to be part of this program for the past 5 years, and I'll be talking to you today about medical school planning and admissions and some of the services that we offer. Before we begin, I just want to tell everybody, I made this announcement previously, but I wanted to reiterate, if you have any questions, please feel free to save them and put them in the chat. You can direct message me, or if you feel more comfortable, or you can put it in the entire group. I'll be happy to answer those questions at the very, very end of the seminar. I'll do my best to try and answer as many questions as I can, depending on how much time we have. Um, all right, so let us begin. So my name is Farah. I went to the University of Pennsylvania for undergrad. I was a biology major, and after graduation, I went to the NIH, which is how I got in touch with Potomac Oak, and I spent a couple years there as a post-bac cancer research fellow, doing work in immunology. I'm currently at Penn State College of Medicine. I was accepted into the MD PhD program. I completed my first 2 years of medical school, and I am currently in my PhD part of my program right now. And we will see, hopefully soon I'll be done with my PhD. I'm here to talk about medical admissions, and I've been helping students with the entire process now for a couple years, and walk through the entire process later in the presentation. But I'm going to start with a little bit of information about what medical school admissions looks like, and kind of try and describe to everyone here. Hopefully, I'm seeing there must be a lot of parents watching this seminar, as well as students, to kind of describe why people are interested in the career in the first place, what are some of the pros and the cons, and then we'll go into some of the services that we offer in terms of the admissions. So Medscape is a great resource for anybody who is interested in learning more about what it means to be a physician in this day and age. And they're a great resource because they publish this couple different reports. One of them is the Physician Job Satisfaction Report. And basically, they survey a bunch of physicians, and they're verified. It's a couple questions. It's a 10-minute long survey, and they basically ask them, you know, what's the most rewarding aspect of being a physician? Or do you regret being a physician? Or do you think your lifestyle makes sense? Or, are you married or are you divorced? So they ask all these personal questions just to try to understand what it means to be a doctor, and not just from a compensation standpoint, but also from how rewarding is it. And so a lot of people decide to go into medicine for different reasons. When they did the survey in 2025, most respondents said that they really like being good at what they do, and, finding answers to questions and diagnosing patients. Another big rewarding aspect of the career is the fact that they can have relationships with patients, as well as having some sort of gratification from the work that they do working with people. Another major reason that makes a physician career so rewarding is the fact that they can make a lot of money. That's about 12% of the respondents, as well as make the world a better place, which is 18% of the respondents. So I think going through this survey, it really gives us a good idea of, now, after going through the admissions process, going through the training, after you make it to the other side, and this is usually about 12 years of training between undergrad, medical school, residency, and fellowship, and depending on how much you specialize. It's nice to know, I think, that most physicians believe that helping patients and also being good at what they do and what they train to do is really what allows allows them to feel really good about being a physician. So for anybody who is thinking about becoming a doctor, I would say you really have to ask yourself, do you have a passion for this? That's one of the major reasons why students usually are interested in medicine. Maybe they are really good at science. I know for me personally, I was always really good at science, so that was something that was kind of, thrown at me since I was since I was young by my teachers. Um, Maybe you have some sort of personal story, for instance. Maybe you got sick or somebody in your life was sick and you had to endure, hospital visits and really had to get to know your a doctor in general really well. Or maybe you just really want to help others in general, and the career that you want to do, you want it to make an impact. So these are all different considerations, I would say. For some people, it is about the prestige, and we can talk a little bit more about that. It is also about job security, high compensation, as well as the lifestyle. Some people really like the lifestyle and think that, this is what they want to do. So overall, I think these are all different reasons over the years, what I have worked with students and what I personally have experienced, what my colleagues have experienced, as to why they go into medicine in general. And so I encourage everyone to kind of think about that a little bit more before they decide, this is what I want to do. Um, in terms of compensation, things have really changed. So I always do the seminar. And so these are all the updated reports for 2025. So compensation becomes a really I think, a driving factor for a lot of people in terms of why they want to, hopefully after all this training, that they can basically pay back their student loans. And so compensation becomes a consideration in terms of which specialties you're interested in, and what you want to pursue. And so from this report, we're still seeing the same trends that we've seen previously. We're still seeing that, the specialists are really making above $500,000 in terms of the average total pay. Now, these numbers are mixed between private and academic medicine. So this is not just private practice and just academic. And so again, the survey is for about 10,000 people. So, and and for each specialty, the numbers are different. So I highlighted here two different specialties that I think are really becoming the new hot specialties these days. One is anesthesia as well as radiology. And, for a lot of people, radiology becomes a question because we know AI is becoming really important in identifying pattern recognition. So I think this number here is high because these are not radiologists, these are actually interventional radiologists. So these are radiologists who are actually going in and doing more work in terms of invasive procedures, and that's additional training on top of a radiology residency. Anesthesia has become very competitive over the past couple years because of COVID. The pandemic really kind of brought to light the importance of having well-trained people who can intubate patients. And so now anesthesia has become very competitive, one of the most competitive specialties for residency. It's just as competitive now as orthopedic surgery and neurological surgery is, as well as dermatology. So that's a very, very hot field right now to go into. Um, and we're still seeing infectious disease kind of rise up a little bit. Now the average is 277. Allergy and immunology medicine has also risen. So all these numbers have kind of overall have risen in general. If you look at the total compensation rises, right, by 3.6% on average from 2022 all the way to 2024. So that's nice to know that physicians are being compensated, and their training and work is being more valued in terms of compensation over the years. So I always like to put this as a slide because I think really indicates the importance in terms of long-term what the career and what the profession looks like. So this is a report that's published by AAMC. So this is the American Academy of Medical Colleges. and or the sorry, the Academy of American Medical Colleges. And so they publish this report each year, and it basically talks about the physician supply and demand. And so AAMC is the organization that runs the medical admissions application, as well as all of the lobbying that happens in Congress. And so this report shows the projected shortages and what the range is. So if we look at this graph here, we can see that we're already here at 2025, and we see that there's already a range of physician shortage that we're already experiencing right now. And the projected shortage in 2036 is going to be between 13,500 to about 86,000. So this is a really big, wide range. At the end of the day, it is a shortage, and this is calculated based off of population growth and considering rural areas as well as urban areas. So the reason why we believe that there's this physician shortage is because of a number of factors, one being this aging population. So most of the money spent in terms of Medicare is spent for end-of-life care. So as the population ages, we also know that it's growing. So the population age 65 and older is projected to grow by 34.1%. And this is primarily due to the 54.7% growth in size of the population age 75 and older. So that's contributing to the physician shortage. There's also just general population growth. So we know that the US population is projected to grow by 8.4%. And then the last contributing factor here is that I wanted to highlight is the fact that there is an aging physician workforce. And so we know that likely more than a third of currently active physicians will retire within the next decade, which means that we have about 20% right now who are practicing that are over the age of 60. So we are expecting more physicians to retire. And this became an important consideration during COVID because a lot of the anesthesiologists actually were retiring during COVID because the demand was a lot, and so there was a shortage of anesthesiologists, and that's also, I believe, is one of the contributing factors for why there is this high demand and this massive shortage of anesthesiologists, and also this demand to join that specialty. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about medical school admissions, since this is what the seminar is about. And I wanted to just orient everybody first about what the state of the career is. And so what's nice about the AAMC is that they've been keeping track of all the applicants. So in this graph here, they charted from 1980, okay, admissions, all the way until the previous cycle, which is the 2024-2025 cycle. And they calculated how many applicants have applied to medical school, how many were first-time applicants, and how many were repeat applicants. And so the stats here show an overall trend. Okay, so more people are applying to medical school in general. And you can see this trend in this blue line here, just showing this nice steady gradual increase in applicants. You can see that in 2022, there was this nice peak in terms of applicants. And I think this was also an influence from the COVID-19 pandemic. But we have seen this kind of normalize over the past few years. So from the last current cycle, the most recent cycle, 2024 to 2025, we know that there was about 52,000 total applicants. And of those, we know that 24,172 were accepted. This is a negative 1.2% change from the previous year in terms of the total number of applications. So we actually saw a little reduction in applications. Something that in medicine we really care about is gender gaps. And so women who who applied were about 29,528, and men were 22,088. And in terms of acceptance, it's about equal. And so that's something that is really important, is making sure that that there's no major gender differences in terms of who's being accepted into medical school. So yeah, so the numbers don't seem that bad, right? If you just do the math, it's about 50% of total applicants are accepted. However, it's a little bit misleading, I would say, if you were to just do that calculation, because each school only takes about 120. There's only about 120 slots overall per school, and there's usually about 10,000 applicants per school. So if you do the math there, the percentage there, admissions is about 1% per school. So it just really depends on who's applying and where they're applying. So certain schools are going to get more applicants than other schools in general. Okay. So moving on here to the next slide. I wanted to share the most recent statistics for applicants and matriculants. So matriculants are people who were accepted and they entered into the medical school class. So the numbers here for GPA are high. So it's 3.66 is the mean undergraduate GPA. And that's the total GPA. So that includes the art classes, the pottery classes, all of that, in addition to the science pre-med courses that are required. While the matriculant GPA you can see is about 3.79. So a 3.66 is a really good GPA, but the people who are getting accepted and matriculating have a higher GPA. So and same thing with the science GPA. So science GPA is 3.56. And again, these are just averages, so it's not the best measure. A median would probably be a better measure here. But regardless, still showing that there's this difference in terms of how competitive it is in terms of the GPA, as well as the MCAT scores. So for those who are not familiar with the MCAT, it's basically the equivalent of the SAT for medical schools. It's 5 sections. There's a physics section, mixed in with chemistry, and then there's a biochemistry, biology section. And then there's a critical reading and analysis section, and there's a psychology and sociology section. Sorry, 4 sections. And so the mean MCAT score for matriculants is a 512. So that's a very high score, and a mean MCAT score of a 506 for those who are applying. And so I would say the MCAT of 512 would probably be equivalent to scoring somewhere in the 90th percentile on the SAT or even higher. So it is really hard to get a 512, and that is the mean MCAT score. So just to keep that kind of relative in your mind. I couldn't find the total average volunteer hours for all applicants, but for matriculants, it was noted that the average volunteer hours is over 700, and that's over 4 years. So you cannot count your high school volunteer hours. So that means students who are applying and getting into medical school, in addition to having close to a 4.0 GPA, in both their total GPA and their science classes, and also achieving a really high score, they're also making sure to be volunteering in the hospitals and patient care settings as well, and they're racking in those hours throughout their undergraduate years. So I mentioned the quantitative scores, and I mentioned the volunteer hours, because the issue, I think, for pre-meds, and as a former pre-med myself, I think there's always a lot of misguidance. And so people don't really know what else they need to do. So a lot of people focus mostly on GPA and MCAT, which is great, but then they forget that they need to have volunteer hours. They need to be able to write really well, right? Because as a physician, you do need to write good patient notes, and that is a very important skill to have. And so for medical schools, they are looking for good writers and people who can articulate themselves really well. So Are you a people person? Becomes a very important consideration. So interviews, how do you do on your interviews? What type of motivation do you have? So I started off the presentation talking about why people go into medicine. And so having a really strong personal narrative describing why you even are interested in it, besides, I'm good at science or mom and dad want me to do it, becomes really important to articulate. And so that's kind of what I think has been a very big challenge for some of the students who do have the capabilities and the scores as well as the GPA to get accepted, but they have a really hard time kind of building a story, right? Like, what kind of doctor do I want to be? Or do my extracurriculars make sense with what I'm interested in? So if you want to be a doctor, but you're spending your whole time doing health policy research, that's okay to do health policy research, but you're not really spending time with patients. And so as a physician, that's what you're going to be doing throughout your entire training is understanding patient care. So being able to do those things become really, really important. Um, and so, uh, so I think for me personally, having worked with so many students and having gone through the process myself, I think the most important thing here is that this process is not very forgiving. And if you make a mistake or you don't get enough volunteer hours, for instance, or you don't get the MCAT score that you're looking for, or you don't pick the correct courses, it can really, really delay your application cycle. And people will take many gap years before they can actually be fully prepared to get accepted to medical school. And that I think becomes one of the biggest challenges is that the process is already long and, making these sorts of mistakes can cost you not 1 year, but 2 years minimum sometimes. And then that can go all the way to 3, 4, 5 years, depending on what the mistake is. And so I'm happy to talk more about that later in the presentation, or if anybody has questions about some of the common mistakes that I've seen in the past. But something I will say about this cycle, in case anybody here is thinking about, applying for this coming cycle with the new Trump administration, getting rid of the DEI initiatives in terms of admissions, something that medical schools are doing are making the admissions race neutral. However, they are offering different pathways to make sure that underrepresented groups are still being accepted to schools. So it doesn't necessarily mean that, it's going to be 100% race neutral, but they will provide an avenue to make sure that those groups are being represented, but it might just be in like a pathway program. So that's something that is still being explored, and I think medical schools we're going to see how they implement that this coming cycle, which starts right now, actually. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the costly mistakes and how it can cost years. I think I like to throw this timeline here for parents, especially to understand how much preparation that's required. So basically, I would say the planning should start. If you can start in high school and you know you want to do medical school, that's amazing. For me, I started in high school. That's kind of how I got involved in the hospital. And for some people, they just know early on that that's what they want to do. But in college, for a lot of students who do enter college and they're not sure, maybe they're thinking about other careers, it becomes really important to start to strategize from freshman year minimum. If you start your sophomore year, things can get complicated. And the reason is because you have to take a certain amount of pre-med requirements. So you have to take 2 semesters of physics, 2 semesters of organic chemistry, you have to take general chemistry, general biology. You have to take biochemistry, statistics, calculus. So there's a lot of classes you have to take, and you can't just take them all in 1 year. They're prerequisites basically for the upper level courses. And then after you take those classes, then you can prepare and take the MCAT, which is, like I said, the equivalent to the ACT or SAT. And so basically, you have to start 2 years before you want to start medical school. So the idea here is that you prepare for the MCAT. Usually you have until April okay, of this cycle you're applying in. And then you can submit your primary application, and then you submit something called a secondary application. So just like in college, where you have to write a primary, you have to write your personal statement, you have to write all your activities, and then you have to write 3 meaningful essays. Then after you submit that and your recommendation letters and your scores and all the essays, then for each school you apply to, you get secondary applications. And those secondary applications have about between 3 to 5 essays, depending on the school. And those essays can be about 200 words to 500 words, sometimes even more for the top schools. Um, and so it's a long process. And usually I tell my students, if you're applying this cycle, don't have a job. Usually students like to do this between their junior year in college and their senior year in college, so that they can start immediately after graduation. If you graduate as a senior and you want to take 1 gap year, then you would be doing this after your senior year in college. So you graduate in May, and then you work on your applications, and you're going to be taking a gap year where you're going to be scheduling and completing your interviews. And you would hear back a year later, okay, about being accepted. And then you would start in mid-July. So what are some of the medical school basic application components? So I've already alluded to some of these already. The first one is your GPA. Okay, so this is a quantitative measure as well as the MCAT score. So this is the only way they can quantitatively measure how well you did in comparison to other students. So getting a 4.0 GPA is helpful. But if you get it at a place like Stanford University versus a smaller school, there's some weight to which school you go to. So that is considered. Or getting like a 3.5 GPA at a place like Stanford compared to a 4.0 at a small liberal arts school is also going to be kind of considered differently, just to be aware. The MCAT score is the measure to standardize all the students. So the MCAT really becomes important here in terms of proving that you, first of all, know how to study for a tough exam, because as a doctor and as a medical student, you have to pass your board exams, your USMLE step 1 and step 2. And so the MCAT kind of becomes a way to make sure that you've really built those study habits and that strong discipline to be able to do that. And then we also need to consider, like I said, the narrative, so activities. So, have you shown leadership? What sort of clinical experience do you have? What are your volunteer hours, and what do they entail? And have you done any sort of research? This could be bench lab work. This could be clinical research. It could even be like health policy research if that's what you're interested in. So all of these things really become important in terms of differentiating you in your essays. The fourth component here are your recommendation letters. So are your professors saying nice things about you? Did you stand out? Are you getting non-science professors as well who can say that you're really passionate about a topic in medicine, like healthcare disparities, for instance, or health inequities? And maybe you got a recommendation letter from an activity advisor, somebody who you've worked with, or maybe you started a nonprofit, or maybe you started a podcast or something and you did something really cool. What do these letters say about you? It becomes very, very important in terms of how they're evaluating you. And then the last component here is not something that's, I would say, a requirement. This is kind of like the cherry on top. Like if you have any sort of impressive accolades, this can help differentiate you, especially for the top medical programs. So if you're getting publications as an undergraduate, like maybe you stayed in the lab for 4 years or 3 years and you were able to publish something, that's really impressive. Maybe you made it to the dean's list every semester. Maybe you got a Fulbright scholarship or Rhodes scholarship. These things really do make a difference when you're being compared to other students who have those things, for especially the top programs. And so I feel like 1 through 4 are just standard. So every applicant who's applying is going to have a decent GPA, or at least not every applicant, but every applicant that has a shot at getting accepted will have a good GPA. I would say a 3.6 and a half and higher, and a good MCAT score. So above a 510, I would say. And in terms of activities, we'll definitely have a ton of clinical experience like shadowing, volunteering, leadership experience, research. So all the applicants are going to have these things. And what's really going to differentiate you is going to be, how involved were you in your activities and what your recommendation letters say. And then also, if on top of all of these things, you're able to get certain awards or accolades as well. And so I think the important thing to remember here is, this is a little bit different than college admissions, because college admissions, you have people with master's degrees in education. You have people who might have, doctorate degrees in education who are evaluating you. But for medical school, you have doctors evaluating you. And so doctors are looking for certain things. And so they know what type of activities you've done because they most likely have done those activities themselves, or have worked with undergraduates in pre-meds. So the standards are going to be a little bit higher, I think, in terms of what they're looking for and, what can come across as being impressive. I always like to add this slide as well, just to, for any, parent or student here who maybe is at the very end of the cycle, and who maybe didn't get accepted anywhere, or who is a reapplicant, or maybe, their GPA is too low, or they can't conquer the MCAT. I would say there are definitely options beyond medical school and the MD. There's DO, which is Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. This is a different sort of medical degree that is still allows you to practice medicine in the United States, and is a viable option. These schools just have a different philosophy in terms of the type of medicine that's being practiced. It's traditionally been for students who don't do well on the MCAT. But now, because it's so competitive to get into MD programs in the United States, the DO programs become a viable option now as well, and they're becoming more competitive. Caribbean schools are another option. These tend to be for students who, for some reason, just GPA is too low. It's not a salvageable GPA where they can do a post-bac program or a master's program for. And maybe their MCAT is too low as well, and they just can't conquer it. So the Caribbean schools become an option as well. They're not the best option, and I don't recommend Caribbean schools. It's kind of like a last resort situation for certain reasons, that I can go into later. And then, of course, there are international programs, like in Germany, for instance, in Canada. And there are other healthcare professions. So I've helped people get into do PA school, for instance. That's a physician assistant school, which has also been very popular recently because it's only 2 years. There's also nurse practitioner, cardiac perfusionist programs. So these are all different sorts of professions that are, adjacent and are within the healthcare field. Yes, and I think that's all I want to talk about here. So my recommendation is, the earlier you plan, the better. Even if your student, your son or daughter, they're not sure, or maybe, if you're a college student right now and you're watching this, maybe you're not sure if you want to become a doctor, right? Maybe it's not like you're not 100% sure, but if it's a consideration, the earlier you plan, the better. Because if you get advice early on, it becomes really important in terms of the planning, right? And in terms of getting you on course on a timeline where you're not, taking 3-4 years between undergraduate to kind of get everything together. So the earlier you plan, the better. I can't emphasize that enough. So in terms of the planning services that we offer, we do 2 check-ins per year. So the idea here, so it's actually not per year, sorry, it's 2 check-ins per semester. So it's the fall semester, we do 2 check-ins, And then in the spring semester, we do 2 check-ins, and then we do a check-in in the summer. So basically, I just meet with you. And so if you're in college, you will probably have a pre-med advisor, but as many people who have experienced that the pre-med advisors in college are typically not the best. Like even when I went to Penn, my pre-med advisor never went to medical school. So, asking questions to somebody who's never gone to medical school, who's never gone through the admissions process, it becomes very, very hard to kind of navigate in terms of trusting what they have to say. The other thing too is going to be figuring out your course selection, and then also kind of going through that and making sure that you are covering everything that you need to cover and that you are on time. So those are the planning services that we offer as early as freshman year in college. Okay. Okay. Some of the packages that we offer include writing through the personal statement, the meaningful activity essays, and then also outlining secondary essays, and then going through interview preparation as well as post-admission decision making. There's different types of interviews that medical schools do. So there's the traditional, and then there's the multiple mini interview, the MMI. So these are all different sorts of interview preparation strategies that we do that's included in all the packages. The only thing that's going to be the major difference within the packages are going to be how many essays that we work on. So if you're interested in any of these services, feel free to schedule a free consultation. You'll be talking to me directly. I'll be happy to evaluate where you're at and what your considerations are and what my recommendations are. So thank you all. And if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. And I don't see anything in the chat, so it doesn't look like anybody was typing anything unless I'm missing something here. I'll leave it open for a few more minutes in case anybody had any questions. Let's see, can you go over the common mistakes to avoid? Yes, so I think some of the mistakes that I've seen is a lot of students think that medical or undergraduate is kind of like college or high school, sorry, where, in high school, you're taught that you want to take as many AP classes as you can, right? And so you double up, triple up on AP classes, and you try to do all the things. And I think in the end, that ends up hurting students in college because science courses in college are much more difficult and demanding. They're not the same thing as AP chemistry and AP biology. And so a lot of students will take AP or will take, general biology and general chemistry together. And then they find out it was really demanding because they were also trying to take, another science class with it or an elective. And at the same time are trying to make friends and, have a social life. And then they realize that without mom and dad there disciplining them and giving them the time management skills that they probably had in a more structured environment, they end up, procrastinating or they're not disciplined. And so they end up not doing so great. And then that counts towards your science GPA. So having 2 Bs becomes really, really difficult. So I would say that's the most common mistake is students will take a ton of science classes in one semester and then they get a C or a D, and then now it's just like you're swimming against the tide at that point, and you're just trying to bring your GPA back to normal, and by normal, a high GPA. Okay, so that's the common mistake, I would say. Can you talk about major selection? Let's see. Can you talk about major selection in college for a rising senior interested in going into medicine? So it really does not matter what your major is. I would say you can major in whatever you want as long as you do the pre-med requirements. I would say I think you should consider what can allow you to do well on the MCAT. For me, I was a biology and psychology major throughout my undergrad, and then my senior year, I just, decided I didn't want to finish all the classes for my psychology major, so I ended up just minoring in it. And I think that was a really smart move because, and I don't regret it because it allowed me to take upper level biology classes that I think really helped me for the MCAT and prepare me for more of the scientific rigor. So I think it just depends. I know people who've majored in economics and were pre-meds and they got accepted to top medical schools. So the major stops becoming important. It becomes more about, okay, if you're an economics major and you're interested in being a doctor, how are you going to use your economics major, right? So that's where health policy, health economics, right? These are all different like hybrid careers you can kind of go into as a physician. And that's something that doctors really care about, is not just having doctors see patients, but also have them kind of in these hybrid careers. So can you talk, okay, so I did that one. So can you test out of certain classes during high school and still get, so you can still get the credit in college, but you still have to take certain, prerequisites. So even if you test out of chemistry, you still have to take um, chemistry. So you still have to take organic chemistry. Now, some medical schools don't care that you take Gen Chem, but I don't suggest you go from AP chemistry in high school and then jump to organic chemistry. That's what I did. And because I tested out, and that was the worst mistake because um, I had to drop organic chemistry my freshman year, first semester, and because I wasn't prepared because the AP chemistry that you take in high school is very easy compared to what you take in college, and what is tested on the MCAT. So that is the truth and reality. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some people who can do it, but it's very rare and far in between that I've seen who do that. Let's see. So it looks like undergraduate college plays a role in the medical admission decisions as GPA is not standardized across undergraduate schools. So wondering what are some of the suggested undergrad universities that are not grade GPA deflated? Yeah, so this is a very good question. There are certain top schools that are known for deflating grades. So University of Pennsylvania is one of them. So the the grade deflation, I think for like my organic chemistry class, the average, if you hit average on the exams, you would get a C plus. So you'd have to hit like two standard deviations above to get an A in the class. So it becomes really hard. But that's what I was saying, like a 3.5 GPA at Stanford University or Princeton or Penn is very different than a 4.0 at a liberal arts school or a 4.0 at Harvard, where Harvard is known for giving everybody A's. So where they have grade inflation. So Princeton is known as a place that has grade deflation. I know Penn is, and I'm not sure the rest in terms of the Ivy Leagues. State schools tend to be really competitive too, like University of Maryland, these like top state schools like UC Berkeley, because you're competing against so many people. So those tend to be harder. So students who go to a top state university are kind of viewed also in this nicer way because they're competing just against a lot more people in general. So if you're getting an A at UC Berkeley or University of Maryland, that's very impressive from an admission standpoint. Um, how common is a gap year between undergraduate and a master's degree? Yes, so very common. I think the average age of matriculation now is 24 years old. And I think it's just increasing because it's just qualifications are just getting harder and harder. So, it's very not many people can, go straight through. So basically seniors go right into medical school. You don't really see that. It's not the majority of matriculants anymore. We're starting to see this trend where people who have taken gap years are definitely the ones that are they took them more time maybe to prepare, maybe, for whatever reason that they needed that time to kind of uh, develop those qualifications. And so that's very common. So people in my class, some of them were 40 years old. So it's normal. And some people were in their, mid 20s, late 20s as well. Some people in their 30s. So the good news is it's never too late to become a doctor. They're very, they like people, medical admissions, in medical schools in general, they want physicians who come from different backgrounds. They want people who've experienced, different careers. They like that because it adds to their class, it adds to the diversity, it adds to people's experiences, and that's only going to help the patients in the end. Okay, and then the last question here is, um, these are kind of combined. We can combine these. How early do you prepare for the MCAT? I would say as early as when you take your pre-med courses. It's hard to prepare for the MCAT unless you've taken all your pre-med courses. And then do people usually take the MCAT multiple times? Yes, people usually take it at least 2 times. I would say maximum 3. It's not good that you take it too many times. Hello, I'm planning on taking MCAT this August. What are some tips you would have for reviewing material? Okay, that's a different question that I can't just answer right now. But I would say schedule consultation. I'd be happy to chit chat more about the MCAT with you. And we do offer MCAT tutoring as well. So if that's something you're interested in, we can talk more about that. Is there a limit on how many times MCAT can be taken? Yes, I think it's 7 times, unless they changed it. They keep changing the rules, but I think it's 7. Is there a strategic major for getting medical school admission, as well as covering the science courses that are that's the kind of stuff that, that an advising session would really help, in terms of like what major you wanted to do. So yes, everybody, you know, there is no one major that's going to get you into medical school. It's really about the student. It's very personalized. Every student has their own unique strengths and weaknesses. And so, and from an admission standpoint, it's really important that you convince people that you are really interested in what you're doing. And the only way to show that is that you've taken classes, you were successful, right? You volunteered, you really want to be an oncologist, right? You've shadowed oncologists, you've worked in a cancer lab, you've taken cancer classes, right? This is kind of the way you show people that you're interested in the topic. Okay. And it's just like in any other field, right? If you're interested in accounting, right, then you take the accounting classes, right? You shadow accountants and you intern with accounting firms, right? It's the same idea, but it's just, translated to medicine. But there are some unique parts of medicine that makes it a little bit more human-based. That's really important. Okay. So yeah, so it's just the MCAT. That's the only exam that's important to take before medical school. So as long as you take that and you do well, then on top of everything else, then you'll be good. All right. So anyway, I'm gonna send everybody off. Thank you so much for joining this seminar. Please schedule a consultation. Be happy to chit chat one-on-one. Everybody has their own questions, their own needs, and that's the beauty of having consultants come in and kind of give these sorts of talks, is that you get a perspective from somebody who's doing this all the time and who's in the field. And so there's a lot of information on the internet, and there's a lot of, you hear a lot of things on Reddit and all over. But I think in the end, it's always good to kind of consult with a specialist and make sure that what you're hearing is not just hearsay, but is rooted in facts and personal experience. So the recording will be available if you email Potomac Oak. I'm not sure what the email is, to be honest. I think it's on the website. But if you reach out if you go on the website and you find the email, you reach out, that you will get the recording. So thank you all for coming. Have a great Saturday. And looking forward to hearing from all of you.
Oh, I just wanted to make a quick note. I am gonna put the email in the chat.
Oh, awesome. There it is. So consulting@potomactutoring.com. Okay. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.